Boa noite a todos. Para quem não me conhece, eu sou a Karina Yamashita, eu sou médica oftalmologista, especialista em baixa visão e coordenadora da live. Sejam muito bem-vindos ao R.E.I Talks, conversa sobre reabilitação, educação e inclusão na deficiência visual. E hoje a gente vai dar início à nossa sexta live, que faz parte dessa grande parceria da Sociedade Brasileira de Visão Subnormal, sob a presidência da doutora Lindalva Carvalho de Moraes, com o Conselho Brasileiro de Oftalmologia. O nosso objetivo é difundir conhecimento, sempre baseado em evidências científicas, e a troca de experiência entre os melhores especialistas da área. Então, médicos, oftalmologistas, todos os profissionais envolvidos na reabilitação visual e também as pessoas com deficiência visual. O nosso intuito, além da divulgação científica, é a compreensão dos desafios enfrentados pelas pessoas com baixa visão e cegueira. E a reflexão também sobre como cada um de nós pode colaborar para uma sociedade cada vez mais inclusiva. E aí, pessoal, vou pedir desculpa para quem não fala inglês, a gente vai começar a live, vou começar a falar inglês somente porque o nosso convidado hoje é americano. A live vai ficar gravada e depois será legendada em português, tá? Então, todo mundo vai ter a oportunidade de assistir. So, good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Karina Yamashita. I'm an ophthalmologist specialized in low vision and the host of R.E.I Talks. So welcome to R.E.I Talks. And first of all, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. So co-hosting the live with me is Dr. Dra Karina Salata. She is a board member of the Brazilian Society of Low Vision, also an eye doctor specialized in low vision. And for the discussion, we have Dr. Rodrigo Sato. He's a retina and low vision specialist, and Dr. Alex Higashi. He's a glaucoma and low vision specialist. And just for the record, we are all members of the Brazilian Society of Low Vision and assistants of the Low Vision Service at the Hospital das Clínicas, University of São Paulo. And the head of the Low Vision Service is Dr. Maria Aparecida Haddad. She should be joining us any minute now. And today we have a very special live session with two international speakers, and Dr. Michael Beyeler and Lucas Tadowskis, who will be joining us in a few minutes. I'd like to thank you once again for kindly accepting my invitation. So let me introduce you, Dr. Beyeler. I'm going to read. Dr. Michael Beyeler, he's an associate professor in computer science and psychological and brain science at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he directs the Bionic Vision Lab. His work brings together computational neuroscience, AI, and immersive technologies to develop sight restoration solutions for people with blindness. He previously earned his PhD from UC Irvine and holds advanced degrees in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering from ETH Zurich. Is that correct, Michael?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And for the audience, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat, and we will answer at the end of the session. And it's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Beyeler to begin his presentation about bionic visual prostheses and their impact on patients living with vision loss. Thank you, Michael.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this kind introduction and the invitation. I'm excited to tell you about bionic technologies today and advances in vision restoration. Many of you are probably aware that blindness affects millions of people worldwide. In terms of the numbers, it has been estimated that over 2 billion people around the world have some sort of vision impairment. 1 billion of these have a vision impairment that could have been prevented, meaning it is due to refractive errors that were unaddressed, or a cataract, also including glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, and other conditions. There are a couple of risk factors that might lead to low vision and blindness, some of which are called modifiable. So that means that you could change, for example, your lifestyle and reduce the risk of developing one of these conditions. If you decide to quit smoking, for example, or eat healthy, that can reduce the risk of getting some of these. Other factors cannot be modified. Aging is by far the primary risk factor for many eye conditions, as well as your genetics and your ethnicity. Even though there's no cure for many of these vision impairments, researchers are trying to come up with treatment options. So they could either slow down the progression of the disease, or perhaps even revert it. It all depends a bit on what is the underlying cause of your blindness. If we look into the developed world, then there are two big players, two big diseases that cause blindness. The first one is shown right here. It's called age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. This is the leading cause of blindness in people over 60 years of age. And it mostly affects central vision. So that means wherever you look, right, wherever you steer your eye, the very center of vision will be blurred or will be missing. And that can make it really hard to go about your daily life as we use our eyes and guide our eyes to look at what is interesting. Again, the primary factor for developing AMD is age, but also your genetics and the environment play a role. What I'm showing on the right is a so-called fundus image. This is a picture of the back of your eye. And if you can see my mouse, there's a big structure on the left that is the optic nerve. This is where the neurons that live in the retina send their axons to the brain. You're going to also see large blood vessels coming out. So naturally, the retina appears kind of reddish, but you can see here that there is a patch of discoloration. And that's kind of this part represents the center of your vision. And you can see that their cells have died or degenerating, are no longer working as they should. The other disease is called retinitis pigmentosa, and it's a family of degeneration diseases. It can affect 1 person in 4,000 roughly, and is again hereditary. What it will do to you is it will lead to a progressive loss of vision, now working the other way around. So starting in your periphery and then slowly working its way in. So if this is left untreated, it will lead to complete blindness. And although there is no cure for this disease or these two, there are emerging treatment options for blindness. It all kind of depends how far along you are on this x-axis that I label disease progression. So both AMD and RP get worse over time. And as mentioned before, if RP is left untreated, you will end up completely blind. And that is mostly due to the loss of photoreceptors in your eye, the light-sensitive cells. If your retina still has viable photoreceptors and you're in the early stage of these diseases, you could opt to get a gene therapy. There's actually one in the US that is FDA approved, Luxturna, for RPE65. That's a very specific mutation of a gene that helps build healthy functioning photoreceptors. And so the idea here is because there's a gene that seems to be malfunctioning in those eyes, perhaps you could get that gene from another eye, a donor eye, and then inject it directly into the back of your eye where the retina lives, which the surrounding cells could then use to maintain some visual function. If you're further along in disease progression, say middle stage, and some of your photoreceptors have already died, then gene therapy might not help. But another option could be to get a transplant. Using an instrument as shown here, you could get a healthy patch of retina inserted into your eye, so-called cell therapy. But once your photoreceptors have died, in the end stage of these diseases, then this is no longer an option. And really your only option left then is an electronic implant. And so typically when we say bionic eye or retinal prosthesis, this is what we're talking about. Typically, it's an implant that consists of a microelectrode array, as shown here. So it has a grid of electrodes that gets implanted directly into your eye or you could also get it implanted directly into your visual cortex, the visual center of your brain. But specifically, the idea here is that it could replace lost functionality of the photoreceptors. And now you have these artificial cells, these electrodes that send electrical current to the surviving cells. And if done correctly, basically, you could restore a form of vision to these people. Now, these retinal or cortical implants, more broadly termed visual prostheses, come in many shapes and forms, and you can have them implanted along different steps of the visual pathway, but they all share some common components. First of all, you need a person with a brain and an external camera that can record or acquire visual input. So let's say the camera is mounted on a pair of glasses and it would basically record video throughout. This is then sent frame by frame, image by image, to a VPU, a vision processing unit, which is, it could be a phone or some other box that you carry around on your belt. And this is typically used for processing the incoming video, doing some optimization in terms of what stimuli should be sent to the brain or to the eye. And so the last step is the microelectrode array, which will receive these images and convert them into electrical signals that are used to activate, to stimulate the neurons in your eye or in your brain. Now, electrical signals, that's how cells usually communicate with each other. They send so-called action potentials or spikes and to each other. That's how they communicate. So if you inserted an electrode array, an implant instead, that could produce the same electrical signal, then the neurons that receive the signal could not know whether the input is produced naturally from cells in your eye, for example, or from this implant. And so that's basically the idea, to kind of hijack the natural visual processing of the brain. And if we apply stimuli, electrical signals to these electrodes, first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to evoke neural activity. We're going to stimulate these cells. They're going to become active. Others are going to become less active. And first of all, we can measure that and understand it. But also what might happen, ideally, is that we produce perception. So some of these implants have been around for a long time. And so we actually know what people experience when you turn on electrodes. And the most famous finding is that when you turn on a single electrode, people see a flash of light. And they describe it sometimes as very bright. It comes on rapidly and then goes away again. And if you turn on many electrodes, perhaps you see many flashes of light. The first retinal implant that was got approval by regulatory boards and was a commercial product, it's called the Argus-2. It was developed by a company called Second Sight, and the device was actually marketed in the US and Europe and the Middle East between, I want to say, 2013 and maybe 2019. This device is implanted in the retina. It has 6 by 10 electrodes arranged in a grid. And the other components as shown here would work as explained. So you would have a camera on the head. Whatever image or video the camera records gets now converted into a low resolution image that only has 6 by 10 pixel basically, and that is used to stimulate this array. Another example is Prima. This was developed by Professor Daniel Palanker at Stanford, and it was commercialized by a French company called Pixium Vision. However, this company is no more, and now a San Francisco Bay Area startup called Science Corporation acquired the intellectual property of Prima and is trying to push forward to get regulatory approval and bring it to the market. Prima is marketed for people with geographic atrophy, which is an end stage of age-related macular degeneration, whereas Argus-2 targeted people with retinitis pigmentosa, so both of the conditions that I mentioned earlier. In addition, there are also implants in development that bypass the eye, because we do have, I mean, there are some people who have lost their eyes, for example, in an accident, or let's say due to retinoblastoma or whatever it may be, and then you can no longer implant in the eye, of course. So there the option is to bypass the eye and go directly into the visual cortex. One prominent example here is the product that Neuralink is developing. What you're seeing here is their first device. It has this case that kind of sits on the outside of your scalp, and then it has these flexible threads which contain the electrodes. And they also have sophisticated machinery, basically a robot that will take one of these threads and push them deep into your brain, exactly where they should go, to avoid the blood vessels, and put them all over your visual cortex. So potentially this device could treat many more causes of blindness, not just RP and AMD. Now, my lab really studies what these devices can or cannot do in terms of the vision they generate. And so far, for the longest time, the assumption was that the mapping from, let's say, pixels in the image that the camera acquires and the electrode is simple, that there is a linear transform that goes from stimulation to perception. This means if you were to stimulate a grid of electrodes, let's say on the retina, you would expect the person to see a grid of luminous dots, or phosphenes, as we call them. And in this worldview, really all you have to do is engineer a device that has as many pixels as possible. So make electrodes that are ever smaller, and so you can pack ever more electrodes into your implant. Here I'm showing an example of electrodes with 100 electrodes with a diameter of 200 micrometers or microns. If you know about the retinal physiology, you may know the foveal pit. So here, each electrode is a little larger than the foveal pit, basically. So you can imagine that if you were to place just one electrode in the retina, it would stimulate hundreds or maybe even thousands of cells. The image we would expect a person to see with an implant like this would appear blurry. It would possibly be black and white, or at least grayscale. And you may be able to see boundaries between the different electrodes. Maybe, maybe not. That's kind of hard to say. But overall, you're left with a patch of blurry dots that, at least right now, make it really hard to tell what kind of image I'm trying to convey. Let's say we look a little bit into the future, and we're able, actually, it's not even the future. Prima would be a good example of a device that has 100 micron pixels. And here we have 350. And if you want to compare that again to structures in the retina, that's basically the size of the dendritic tree of a large retinal ganglion cell. Now we can start to see patterns, forms, and shapes emerge. It's still all black and white, but you can start seeing outlines of something. And so maybe if we have even smaller pixels, now 50 microns, the size of a large ganglion cell soma, now you start to get the idea that what you're looking at is two little boys. In fact, they're playing outside and they're smiling. So if we go down to 20 micron pixels, which is now about the size of a single cell, we may be able to create useful vision with a device like this. And at that point, we might even get a color picture out, though that's kind of a challenge to predict what might happen. And so if we go back to, let's say, macular degeneration, you can start to appreciate how much of a difference such a device would make. So if you have macular degeneration, you're missing part of your center of vision. So I'm visualizing that here by having this blurry region in the center of the screen. So imagine you're looking straight ahead, and you now only have your periphery to work with. And you may see, okay, there's a bike on the left, I'm outdoors, I see a stop sign on the right, the bike is moving forward, but I can't really see what's in front of the bike. So I have to move my eyes. Let's say I move them to the left. Now I'm uncovering what was behind the so-called scotoma, the missing part of the visual field. And now I see that there's another person hiding back there, and there's something on the ground. It looks like a backpack that's spilled out. And the person is also signaling to the bicyclist to stop. And so with macular degeneration, you may have not appreciated the whole complexity of the scene. And so you have to keep moving your eyes around until you have uncovered every part of the visual scene. Now with a retinal implant, you may be able to get back some of that information in your scotoma. With a current day or generation device, what you may be able to see is, again, black and white, blurry patches and shapes. But, looking a couple of years into the future, we'll soon be able to engineer devices that span a much larger field of view, maybe even filling out the entire region of your scotoma. And then as electrodes get smaller, we'll be able to pack in more detail so that you can truly fill out the entirety of the scotoma with a high resolution image. Prima is one example of this, again, targeted for macular degeneration, and it is implanted in the subretinal space, meaning it's interfacing with the bipolar cells, therefore trying to replace the lost photoreceptors. It works for AMD as when you still have some peripheral vision left and the inner retina is still intact, but you're basically missing the photoreceptors. So there it makes sense to replace these lost cells with an implant. Another benefit is that it can stimulate the remaining retinal circuitry. And so the signal that the brain receives looks very much like a natural signal that the retina may generate. However, the flip side of that is that you need a functional inner retina. So all these cells that you're talking to, of course, still have to be alive and they have to be doing their job. So it will not be a good fit for retinitis pigmentosa, where many cell classes degenerate over time and the retina rewires and completely changes its function and circuitry. So let's talk about that. Retinitis pigmentosa seems to be a more challenging case. And even though there's no way to know for sure what people with retinitis pigmentosa experience or people whose vision was restored experience and what they see, I put together this animation, this video of what it might look like based on what we know by talking to different users of retinal implants and different reports of low vision implant people. And so we start with, it has sound, huh? I don't know if you can hear the sound, but it's showing UCSB campus. And early on in retinitis pigmentosa, you may lose your peripheral vision. And that may grow inwards over time, so that over time, you lose all of your vision until you're completely blind. Now, at this point, you may qualify for retinal implants. You may have the money to afford the surgery and the device. And when you first turn it on, you may see a flash of light. And it may not look like much. It'll be very blurry. Over time, the shapes may get clearer, sharper, and you may learn to interpret their shapes, what they mean, and where they appear. Over time, you may even be able to tell apart whether you see one phosphene or two phosphines, or you may even be able to see motion and judge the direction of something that moves. But no matter how long you use your implant, it seems you cannot get form vision back. So it's really hard to create an understandable image of something more complex than just a couple of simple shapes. So seeing faces, again, seeing color, recognizing objects, all these things cannot be done with current day technology. How do I know that? Well, I know that because I have worked with people with an Argus 2 device, for example, and we asked them what their phosphenes look like. we did very simple experiments where we would turn on just a single electrode and we asked people to outline what they see on a touch screen. And so if you address a single electrode, you can send one of these electrical pulses. And typically we use biphasic rectangular pulses. They need to have a positive and a negative phase, cathodic and anodic phase, so that you leave no lasting current in the retina for safety. And what you ultimately can play with is the height of the pulses, the amplitude, how many pulses you send, the frequency, or how long each pulse is, the phase duration. And so we could here use an example of a 20 hertz pulse for like half a second, and that's common for Argus 2. We turn on one electrode, boop, and we ask them, what did you see? Can you draw it? And so this, for this particular electrode that I'm showing here, the person actually drew a streak. So it looks kind of like an arc, right? A half moon or something. And that seems odd because the electrode is round. We just activated one. Why would they draw a streak? Perhaps it was a fluke. Let's try again. But trial 2, they draw the same streak. In fact, no matter how many times you ask them to do it, they will draw the same shape. So the first thing to realize is that phosphenes are not pixels. At least the ones created by Argus 2 are distorted. And what we later found out is that each electrode produces a unique shape. It appears in a unique location, and that shape, which is often elongated, a wedge or one of these arcs, has a particular orientation. And I'll show you an example here of an Argus 2 array, and what you see overlaid over the electrodes are the shapes that people drew. Each shape is averaged over 5 drawings, and the center of the shape is overlaid over the electrode. So that tells you that if we're on the left here, people were mostly drawing vertical, near vertical streaks, and then moving to the right, they were drawing more diagonal streaks. But they were all streaks. None of them were pixels. Although that is kind of patient dependent, every person sees it slightly differently. And you can find other people who may see more blobby things, technical term. If you can see that on the right here, perhaps these are pixels. It depends a bit on their size, right? Whether they're triant blobs or tiny low pixels. But even this person who saw a lot of pixel-like, blob-like phosphenes still had streaky phosphenes. And so overall, it leaves us with a picture that this phosphene vision is not as we thought. It's not, a phosphene is not a pixel in an image. And what is even worse is that if you turn on more than one electrode, these pixels don't add up, not all the time. So you can find, let's say you turn on one electrode E1, it produces a streak. Another electrode A10 produces a dot. You can find examples like this. When you turn on both electrodes at the same time now, you do get a streak and a dot, but not always. Sometimes, even though both electrodes produce a blob by themselves, if you turn them on at the same time, they will not produce 2 blobs. They will still produce 1 blob, and it has a different shape and a different size and everything. And so over many years, we have tried to map out the range of phosphenes that people report, and we've tried to figure out a way to predict what they see. And so it's a work of one of my other students, Jacob, who went through all the papers that were published on retinal implants and try to categorize them and figure out how does, for example, the amplitude of the pulse affect the brightness of a phosphene, or the size, or the elongation? And what about the frequency? And what about the pulse duration? And he put all of that into a model so that we could figure out systematically how amplitude, frequency, and pulse duration affect the appearance, the shape of the phosphenes. And long story short, I'm summarizing here like 5 years of work. If you increase the amplitude, what happens is the phosphene mainly gets larger. It doesn't necessarily get brighter. And if you know something about the neuroscience of the eye, that could make sense, or how electrical stimulation affects the retina. As you increase the amplitude, you're basically affecting the size of the tissue that is affected. And the opposite effect you can get with frequency. Here, the phosphene gets brighter, not necessarily larger. And this can also make sense because now with a higher frequency, you're sending more pulses, perhaps you're eliciting more action potentials, which the brain interprets in a certain way, namely that it will interpret it as something getting brighter. Pulse width was a bit more complicated. To summarize here, if you increase pulse width, you can basically reduce the streakiness a little bit. So when people first drew arcs and you increase the width, now they will draw more blobby things. And so what we can do is put all this information together and build a computational model that allows us to predict what people will see. Now, when you turn on different electrodes and many of them together. The simplest version of this that you may have seen out there, we call that the scoreboard model, which is basically a downsized version of the input. So if you didn't know anything about what phosphenes look like, you might assume this, a clean but misleading picture of basically a grayscale movie with blobby, blurry pixels. If your model assumes dots or pixels, it may not help real bionic eye users because they see it differently. So a step closer to reality would involve using these streaks that people have reported. And now it's getting much harder to see what the video is showing. I haven't described the video yet. We're looking at a subway scene. It's very busy. The train is arriving, and there's a person, and there's many people moving, but there's a person moving close to us from left to right. And so what we can see in the phosphene vision, the simulated one, is mostly blur, grayscale shapes, and we see a shadow move from left to right, which probably corresponds to this person that is close to us, but there's no way we could read what's written on the sign, or even seeing the train arrive is challenging. And still, this is a simplification because phosphenes are not just distorted in space, they're also distorted in time, meaning they can flicker, they can fade. And if you put all of that together into a simulation, then the video looks very different and basically unrecognizable to the input video. Now we see flickering phosphenes. It's like looking at an electric thunderstorm of sorts, or snowstorm maybe in the night. And phosphenes pop up in different locations, and they're really quick, and they all have slightly different shape. So with this knowledge, it's perhaps not surprising that implant usage falls short currently of at least the researchers' expectations. My student Lucas and Lily and I ran a survey where we were speaking with real bionic eye users and researchers behind these technologies. And we basically wanted to know, are these implants being used in daily life? And the most common answer was no. That at first they were very excited to get it, and they were aware there were limitations. But even when they get it, they realized it's worse than what they thought, and the usage they got out of them was very limited. Researchers were on the other side and thought people should get some use in at least some daily activities. It would be useful to see whether the light is on in the room or when someone walks by. But ultimately, there seems to be a disconnect between the researchers, who are mostly sighted, and the blind end users. One of our interviewed blind users felt very strongly about that and said, researchers have no clue how it is to be blind, and they do not open themselves up to opportunities to learn about the blind community. And so this is an alarming statement that we should discuss later, and really asks what we can do to inform the next generation of implants, to learn from previous mistakes and build a device that people actually want to use. And so when you ask them, what would you want to see in the next generation of these implants? People mentioned vision enhancement, which is kind of the core promise of these technologies, that you get an improved quality of artificial vision, that you can see different colors, and that you have a sense of depth perception so that you know where things are in relation to you. The other thing a lot of people mentioned was smart integration. So providing functionality similar to smart glasses, naturally integrating text-to-speech services, and making use of all the cool developments that come out of the tech industry. And then third was object identification, or really most people wish to be able to read again or to recognize familiar faces again. One of our interviewees said that they would love to be able to read stop signs again or road signs, just anything, they said, to make this vision useful in daily life is what they wanted. And so the picture that emerged is that people really envision their implant to offer benefits that go beyond what they can get from a mobility cane or from a smart dog or even from a smartphone application. It doesn't have to look completely natural, but it has to be useful in a way. And so one way we in the lab are working towards that as using simulations, we're trying to see what the next generation might be able to do. And so we have the power now to simulate any implant in the retina or in cortex. For example, there's one called the Utah R.E.I, which is also used in animal research. It has about 100 channels, and it's in clinical trials currently. And what we could do is we could not just simulate what this one does, but we could look a step ahead and say, well, what if you had 9 of them implanted all over your brain, your visual cortex? What would that look like? And we can run simulations to now get an idea of what is the kind of vision that we can expect from a technology like this. And so if you had 9 arrays in a 3x3 grid, now you'll be able to span a large field of view and fill that in with perhaps still grayscale, but details that allow you to see the subway scene much better. And now you can identify different people, and there's not just one large shadow moving. Another thing we're working on in the lab is to figure out a better way of stimulating. And this is very theory-driven and uses a lot of what we know about the neuroscience and the vision science of our brain. So earlier I told you, you could stimulate an implant and you get neural activity out or a visual perception, a phosphene. What we have done so far is basically explain that input-output relationship with a model. Basically a function f, right? That takes as input the stimulus and it outputs the response. Well, you could go a step further and ask not, well, if I stimulate here, how weird does it look? But ask, well, how do I produce a desired image in the mind of the user? How do I make him see stuff? If I want to produce a face, which electrodes do I have to activate? And so what you need is to put another box in front of this model F that basically inverts all the weird distortions that F introduces. So basically take the inverse of that. And then you can find the inputs that make your predicted output as close as possible to the target output. Another way that we use our simulations is that we have all the models embedded in virtual reality. And that allows us to incorporate head, eye, and body movements, just like a regular bionic eye user would. Because the problem is that if your implant is rather small, you can only see a small portion of the world, then you necessarily need to move your head a lot so you could see the world one puzzle piece at a time. And that is really hard to simulate on a screen, but virtual reality is perfect for that because we can create worlds. Let's say we can have people practice crossing a street, a busy street, or walking along the sidewalk without them getting hurt. And we can try out new ideas of how to stimulate the implant, or we give them like a next generation implant and see how well does that work in real life tasks. So that allows us to look ahead into the future. Smaller implants, larger electrode counts, new ways to stimulate, new ways to pre-process the visual stimulus. Altogether, we think about this approach as a smart bionic eye, as we like to call it, because we don't necessarily need to recreate the world as naturally as possible. What we need to be able to do is provide useful visual clues that let people do tasks in their daily life. So navigating from going from A to B. If you think about that, you're outside. Well, you probably need to know first of all, where you're going, where's your destination, who's nearby, am I about to run into a person, am I safe right now, am I next to the street, are there cars on the street? So really what we could do is we could use computer vision in AI to extract that information that is relevant for, let's say, navigation. And then we simplify the scene, and that's what the Bionic AI shows. We don't care right now if there are birds in the sky far away. We care about the here and now that is relevant for this task. And this might look very different from navigation compared to conversation mode. Let's say you're in a busy, I don't know, you're at a fancy dinner and it's crowded and you're sitting at a table with other people. You need to know, well, who's right next to you? Is this chair free? Who's looking at me? Who's talking to me? And so these affordances are very different from task to task. And you can think of a number of different tasks for which the Bionic Eye might be useful. What we could do is we could develop such a smart Bionic Eye with our virtual reality prototype, because we can simulate all these cases and see which one works best. And then we can go out and test what works in VR, now test with real users. And so we imagine a design process that iteratively refines what the smart Bionic Eye could do and target it to different tasks that are useful in the real world. So to summarize, how do we get to a smart Bionic Eye? Well, first of all, we need a really good understanding of what the vision looks like that these implants can provide. We need good models that don't oversimplify and that fit the reports, the clinical reports of real users. We need to move away from simple clinical tests and think about real world tasks that can be useful in everyday life. And we need to involve end users in all stages of the design process, because it should not be the case that a sighted researcher designs something for a blind user that they know nothing about. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you again for inviting me. I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beyeler, for this excellent presentation on visual prostheses. I saw Dr. Beyeler's talk at the World Blindness Summit, and it was amazing, super interesting. I think it really brought some fresh perspectives for people, for the patients with visual impairment. So thank you so much. Lucas, are you with us?
He is muted.
Lucas? Let's wait for Lucas. One second, please. So I think I could go on with the questions and wait for Lucas, right?
Sure.
Okay. So we have some questions here from the chat. Let me see the first one. So Dr. Beyeler, how can cortical implants promote visual neuroplasticity? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I haven't touched on is cortical plasticity. So from what we know, the brain undergoes a lot of changes during blindness. It depends a bit when you turn blind and how long you've been blind for. But one thing we believe might happen is, since so much of the brain is devoted to vision, if you are blind and do not get visual input, what might happen is that other brain areas might take over what we call visual cortex. And the consequences of that is that now what we used to call visual cortex, processes sounds, for example, or touch. If we bring back an implant, we basically can generate visual input in these areas, and that might be a way to prevent this so-called cross-model plasticity from taking over. And so the hope has been for both retinal and cortical implants that if you look at the regions near the implant where there didn't used to be any activity because the input was lost, that if you keep stimulating that the neural tissue regenerates or looks more closely to what a sighted brain might do.
Okay, perfect.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we
There
can
we
hear, but
go.
we can't see you.
There we go. You can or can't?
Can't. We
Oh,
can't see you.
it's weird. My camera should be on. Well,
Yeah, we can perfectly hear you, but we can't see you. Technical problems.
I'd like to ask a question.
Oh, sure.
Maybe. We have the Argus implant, right? And it was discontinued.
Mm-hmm.
And then we heard that the second side company migrated to cortical implants.
Yeah.
Because it might be a better vision, something like that. And then we now see the Prima implant, kind of like close, looks like more closer to the market than the cortical implants.
Yeah.
What do you see? How do you see the future of this technology? Do you think the retinal implants are gonna start earlier than the cortical implants, or vice versa? How can we see these things going in the next years?
Yeah. I mean, I hope that both will survive because they serve somewhat different user demographics, if you will. So again, the Prima device is mainly targeting macular degeneration right now, and the specific form, the dry version, geographic atrophy. And so that means it cannot treat a lot of people with other very common causes of blindness. That being said, it's an exciting device because there's nothing else out there for AMD that could help to this extent. So I see the efforts going on in parallel and serving slightly different purposes. With a cortical implant now, you could target many different causes of blindness, but now you're also talking to the brain rather than the eye. So you really have to understand which brain area are you in? How do neurons usually communicate in this brain area? What approach should I use? Should I have large electrodes on the outside? Should I have tiny low electrodes that I can push deeper into the brain? These might all produce slightly different vision, and so in the end might serve different purposes. And I hope that both of these approaches will continue, so that there are a lot of different options for people out there.
Thank you very much.
Lucas is still having problems with the.
Oh no.
Do you have any time horizon for this technology come to the real world?
I mean, the optimistic timeline is that Prima is applying for regulatory approval right now. It might be on the market in the next, I don't even know, 2 to 3 years. Neuralink is very aggressive in their timeline as well. They're talking also about next year or 2 or 3 to have the first implant. So it could be here soon. The pessimistic answer is that these aren't the first implants. This technology has been around at least since 1950. That was the first one. And we've seen little progress since then in terms of the quality of vision that these different implants can produce. And so that doesn't really answer your question, but I find it hard to predict, right, when the killer app basically comes out and we'll have people waiting in line like they do for new iPhones.
So, Dr. Beyeler, do you take new patients for the trials? How does it work?
We don't run trials at UC Santa Barbara. Because we're an independent research group, so I'm not affiliated with any of the companies I mentioned. We do collaborate with companies, with other research groups who do have implants and access to patients. Right now, there's a clinical trial in Chicago, the ICVP implant in Cortex. There's a clinical trial in Spain, the Cordavis group, and there's probably others that I'm forgetting right now.
Okay. So we should start here in Brazil also. I have another question from the chat. How can the community of rehabilitation professionals and visually impaired people collaborate in research for advances in implants and new technologies for vision restoration?
Fantastic question. So with Second Sight, they had rehabilitation specialists work with the patients after they got implanted to learn how to use the implants and get the best use out of it. That was great. I don't know the plan of the current companies. I would assume or hope that this trend continues, but I also would like to see it earlier, right, before the technology is developed. And so that can be as simple as reaching out to the research groups that are working on this, and I'd be happy to connect you, so that the design of the device is also guided by their knowledge. Lucas is here.
Is it working now?
Hi, Lucas.
Hello, can you hear me and see me now?
I can hear you, but your screen is now with landscape, I guess, but I can't see you.
Do you have your camera covered?
No.
We see your background.
My camera works if I open the camera app. It shows my image perfect, but for some reason, Chrome is not accepting my camera.
Oh. So, would you like to try a little bit more, Lucas?
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep it with another question. Is that okay for you,
Yeah.
Dr. Beyeler?
Yeah.
So, is there any large pharmaceutical company interested in investing in those implants, or is it all university or government funded?
Great question. I'm not aware of any large pharmaceutical companies. I would say most of the field is dominated by smaller scale biomedical startups. For a long time, the pathway was that there's a research group first. They come up with a great implantable device, and then they try to commercialize it. So they will have a spin-off, a startup to get that going. This might be changing now that BCI, brain-computer interfaces, are gaining more traction. And we've seen the advent of Science Corporation and of Neuralink, who arguably have about as much money or more than a pharmaceutical company.
Okay, thank you. Alex, would you like to share something with us?
Yes. First of all, thanks for the presentation. It was really inspiring. And I'd just like to comment about the thing that you said. I always thought about that artificial vision should provide us visual clues instead of, a realistic vision. I think that's most important for us to do rehabilitation work. We most work on functionality rather than try to see again. So I think that's really the way that we should work with patient expectations around these implants. So it's really great to see that we're going the same direction. as the researchers?
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, maybe to you, that seems like, of course we should do that, but it hasn't traditionally been done in the implant community. So another reason why, we need to work together.
Yeah.
Give me 1 minute. I'm just gonna try logging from a different computer.
Okay.
It's gonna get better.
We'll be
Sorry
here
about
waiting
that.
for you, Lucas. Oh, it's okay. It's more than okay.
I would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Beyeler.
Sure.
I would like to know, I don't know if it's possible to know that when you do when you are going to do the surgery to put the prosthesis,
Yeah.
how do you choose which visual area are you going to put it on the brain?
Yeah. So people have used TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, sending a magnetic pulse, right, to see which areas respond to that sort of stimulation, which areas can produce phosphenes. And there were actually a number of early visual areas that could do that. And the higher up you go in the hierarchy, the less likely it seemed to elicit phosphenes. So that limited people to early visual cortex, which is kind of what people are targeting now. It's, as you can imagine, challenging to implant these devices in the first place and to find the right location. From what I understand, I'm not a neurosurgeon, but from what I understand, there are constraints that you're mainly trying to target the region of interest while avoiding major blood vessels and whatnot. So it's, at least so far, it has not been like a highly precise placement. Although our simulations could tell you, hey, if you put it a little over there, you would get different phosphenes probably. That is something that might be used in the future, or we hope that we could guide the surgery based on our insight of, the cortical maps, retinotopic maps of people, their particular folds, and what kind of vision you would want.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I have more questions here.
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
Dr. Michael, would you say that, or I don't know if you have any experience with other cortical implants for other rehabilitation areas like motor rehabilitation? Would you say that is it easier to stimulate when you have a loss of function of motor function than visual function, since vision is a perceptual feeling? You have our own perception. It's very different from each patient, and I would say that I think it's a bit, when you talk about motor function, it's a bit more similar to different patients.
Yeah, I see. I would not call it easier. I'm sure it's tremendously hard, tremendously challenging, and it's really impressive what some of these PCI can do. For speech, for paralysis, all sorts of things. I can comment on on cochlear implants, another example, right? That is now hugely successful. And it took that technology a long time to get to a point where people accepted it and could use it. So sometimes it feels like visual implants are kind of stuck in that first phase where, you can see something, but it's not quite good enough yet. Or perhaps it's still too weird, too artificial for the brain to understand. And you have to kind of get a little closer to the natural processing, and then maybe it will take off. but so far it hasn't happened. And perhaps one difference is that vision is really a high resolution sense, right? You cannot get much with 2 or 3 pixels. You really need the numbers. And that's usually also how the brain processes the visual information, that there's so many neurons, subpopulation of neurons, different brain areas involved in making sense of the light that hits our retina, that it could be much harder to build a visual implant to the same level of satisfaction.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yay!
Hi, Lucas.
It only took 2 computers, browsers, and 2 people.
Now we can finally see you. Welcome.
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear us?
Hello?
Oh, no. Can you hear us?
I don't think so.
We're here. I'm here.
Can you hear us?
Turn off mute microphone button.
Yeah.
Turn off and label 0 button collapsed. Wiccan camera private chat tab 1 Wiccan space setting level 2. Close mobile button. Camera tab panel. Camera combo box. Integrated camera left parent 30 Z. Camera resolution custom. Camera close mobile button. List of free items. Camera tabs. Audio tab. Center list with. Visual effects tab. Audio tab selected. Visual setting level 2. Close mobile button. Audio tab panel. Mic combo box. Microphone array left parent Intel registered smart sound technology for digital mic center expanded list with free items. Microphone array. Mic combo box. Speaker combo box. Play test sound button to activate. Info cancellation check. Info button. Produce background. Info button. Info button. Automatic. Info button to act. Close mobile button to act. Audio tab panel. Mic combo box. Speaker combo.
Now you're muted. But can you hear us?
I don't think.
Tell me that now it's working.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Oh, perfect. And we can see you and hear you.
Also, apparently, I cannot use my headphones.
Okay.
I
Is
am,
that okay for you without headphones?
I am so sorry about this.
It's okay, Lucas. Don't worry.
All right.
So let me introduce you, Lucas. Lucas is actually Brazilian. He's a PhD student in dynamical neuroscience at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a researcher at the Bionic Vision Lab. He's blind since the age of 5. Is that correct, Lucas?
Yes, that is correct.
So Lucas brings not only his scientific expertise in cortical visual prosthesis, but also his personal perspective as someone living with visual impairment. So Lucas, thank you once again for being here with us. And would you mind sharing with us all your personal experiences and your perspective on visual prosthesis?
Of course. Boa noite a todo mundo. Eu sei que já é 8h30 no Brasil, 5h30, 9h30 no Brasil. Eu vou falar em português porque o Michael já ouviu isso várias vezes, então, enfim. Eu nasci no Brasil, nasci em São Paulo. Com 5 anos de idade, eu perdi a visão por conta de um retinoblastoma bilateral. Desde o momento que eu perdi a visão, os meus pais fizeram com que eu ficasse muito focado em tecnologia. Na época, a gente trabalhou muito com o Laramara, em São Paulo, com a Fundação Doriana Noel, e eu entrei para... eu comecei muito cedo, com 7, 8 anos de idade, já comecei a usar um computador. Na época, era DOS-Vox ainda, nem tinha direito de JAWS, depois que eu comecei a usar o JAWS. E a minha mãe teve que ser a minha tradutora oficial para Braille. Minha mãe teve que aprender Braille e fazer toda a tradução de tinta para Braille numa máquina Perkins, que nós trouxemos dos Estados Unidos, então ela tinha que digitar tudo à mão. Depois de um tempo, a gente conseguiu levar dos Estados Unidos para o Brasil uma impressora Braille, e aí a minha mãe começou a fazer esse tipo de conversão usando o computador, o que facilitou um pouco as coisas. Mas desde o momento que eu estava no ensino médio, eu tinha muito claro para mim que caso eu quisesse focar a minha carreira em algo envolvendo tecnologia assistiva, eu teria uma chance muito maior de trabalhar com isso de uma maneira mais acessível e mais honestamente fácil, indo para fora do Brasil. Então, com 18 anos de idade, eu apliquei para faculdades nos Estados Unidos, entrei na Universidade of Minnesota, onde eu comecei a trabalhar com ciência da computação, e na época eu estava mais focado em robótica, em computer vision, e em realmente trabalhar mais com o que a gente chamaria hoje de acessibilidade per se, né? E depois de alguns anos trabalhando, eu estava fazendo meu undergrad na época, undergrad nos Estados Unidos são 4 anos, eu estava no meu 3º ano, eu comecei a fazer umas aulas de neuroscience. E eu fiquei interessado na neurociência, o meu ponto era que não fazia muito sentido na minha cabeça entender visão de computadores sem antes entender a visão humana. E aí eu comecei, na época, eu fiz aula com o professor Gordon Legg, que até hoje é um mentor meu, e comecei a ir para esse lado de Vision Science e Neuroscience. E eu acabei adicionando um segundo major, que foi o major em Neuroscience, e me interessando muito por essa parte de Visual Prosthetics. Na época, saiu os artigos sobre o Argus, e eu comecei a ler sobre aquilo e achar interessante. Falar, pô, isso aqui está indo um passo além do que eu estou pensando em fazer com relação à acessibilidade, e eu me interessei por aquilo. E depois, no ano de 2021, era quando eu me formei. 2021 foi um ano interessante. E eu apliquei para um programa de mestrado, eu apliquei para vários programas de PhD, acabei que não consegui, porque na época da pandemia ninguém estava aceitando aluno de PhD. E aí eu apliquei para um programa de mestrado, fui fazer meu mestrado em engenharia biomédica em Carnegie Mellon, onde eu comecei a trabalhar mais com essa parte de Visual Prosthetics. E na época eu trabalhava num lab de pesquisa de animais, a gente fazia pesquisa de neuroscience na parte do córtex visual de macacos. E eu comecei a entender que isso podia ser mais aplicado para prosthetics, e em 2022 eu decidi que eu queria visitar os labs que trabalhavam com Visual Prosthetics. Foi aí que eu visitei o lab do professor Eduardo Fernandes, na Espanha, visitei os labs em Amsterdã, e como o Michael disse, uma coisa que ficou muito claro para mim é que não tinha nenhum cego trabalhando no meio. E é o que eu comentava, de que eu achava que era, no mínimo, em falta de um termo melhor, uma presunção da gente querer trabalhar com o mercado sem ter um cego sentado na mesa do outro lado, lá da pesquisa. E isso que me fez realmente decidi que eu queria fazer o meu programa de doutorado em Visual Prosthetics. E quando eu voltei para os Estados Unidos, na época, o Gordon, que era o meu professor em Minnesota, estava conversando com ele, e ele me comentou do trabalho do Michael, que o Michael fazia essa parte de modeling, que era mais focada em computer science, que honestamente eu achava mais acessível, porque se eu fosse trabalhar com uma coisa mais neuroscience no termo biológico, eu tinha medo que não fosse ser muito acessível para mim, eu não sabia quanto eu ia conseguir contribuir. Eu mandei e-mail para o Michael, nós tivemos 2 reuniões, e principalmente quando ele me falou que o lugar onde ele tinha o lab era do lado da praia e longe da neve, eu combinei com ele e eu acabei começando meu programa de doutorado aqui, e é onde eu estou há 3 anos trabalhando no meio. Alô?
Lucas?
Oi, oi, oi.
Oi.
Agora eu te ouço.
Lucas, muito interessante sua história. Obrigado por compartilhar com a gente. Você poderia explicar um pouquinho? Porque, assim, esse meio de pesquisa não é um meio acessível, assim, né, para quem tem baixa visão. Você imagina um monte de artigo científico. Como que você conseguiu vencer essas barreiras? Você pode contar um pouquinho para a gente?
Cara, da mesma maneira que eu falei que a minha mãe, quando eu era criança, era o meu tradutor, eu acabei hoje que eu tive que desenvolver a minha própria maneira de fazer as coisas. Sim, é um meio completamente não acessível. Eu falei, não tem nenhum cego no meio e hoje eu entendo por quê. Porque é um meio que permite muito pouco que uma pessoa com deficiência trabalhe nele. Eu diria que a primeira coisa é realmente o quanto eu gosto do que eu faço. Para ser bem honesto com você, se eu não sentisse que isso é literalmente o trabalho mais importante que eu posso fazer na minha vida, eu não estaria fazendo, porque é muito trabalho. Situações extremamente frustrantes de você pega um artigo para ler e o artigo não é acessível, e aí você converte usando algum software e a conversão é um horror, ou converteu o texto, mas não converteu a equação, e aí você vai ver a equação que converteu não é... Então, assim, é o dia inteiro isso. Como que eu venci isso? Primeiro, como eu falei, realmente adorando o que eu faço. Segundo, me rodeando de pessoas que me ajudam com isso. Então, eu entendo que para o Michael, por exemplo, ter um aluno com deficiência no lab apresenta uma série de dificuldades. E eu não vou tentar aliviar, não vou tentar falar que está tudo certo, porque eu sei que há um desafio. Sabe? Você imagina, eu tenho um paper publicado numa conferência, eu tenho que ir lá e apresentar um pôster. Como é que eu vou fazer meu pôster? Então, assim, ter sorte de sempre tentar estar no meio de pessoas que me dão esse apoio e que me ajudam. E uma coisa que foi muito importante para mim é desligar um pouco o lado da minha cabeça de querer fazer tudo e querer que tudo seja acessível. Então, assim, existem papers, existem gráficos que eu não vou conseguir acessar, e é muito melhor eu chamar alguém e pedir para esse alguém me explicar o que está no gráfico do que eu perder horas tentando fazer aquilo ficar acessível. Então, esse tipo de coisa é o que eu falo, pick your battles o tempo inteiro. E eu sei que não é necessariamente a resposta que as pessoas esperam, mas honestamente é a resposta que eu posso dar no momento. É bem por esse lado mesmo.
Não, obrigado por compartilhar.
Primeiro, obrigada por participar, por aceitar o nosso convite. Eu queria saber, o que você mais usa de recursos, né, no seu dia a dia? Você tem alguma coisa diferente aí nos Estados Unidos, não sei, do que aqui no Brasil?
Olha, eu acho assim, toda vez que eu falo que eu tenho oportunidade de falar com deficientes no Brasil, eu falo que eu escolhi o caminho fácil, que é vir para fora. Então, assim, o que a gente tem de recurso aqui? Tudo. Falando de um jeito simples. Então, hoje eu tenho a oportunidade de ter JAWS, NVDA, 2 linhas Braille, impressora Braille, impressora 3D. Uma coisa que a gente acabou de chegar no Lab, que chegou semana passada, foi uma Graphics Display, que é uma tecnologia super nova que está saindo agora. Então, assim, claro que eu não posso falar sobre acessibilidade 2025 e não mencionar AI, porque, né, não tem como. Então, a gente tem usado, eu particularmente uso muito modelos diferentes de AI para me ajudar a descrever um gráfico. Eu vou te dar um exemplo realístico que aconteceu hoje. Eu queria ler um paper, o paper não era acessível, eu fiz a conversão não era acessível, eu não estava achando absolutamente nenhuma maneira de fazer aquele paper ser acessível. Coloquei no Gemini, pedi e coloquei um prompt de explique este paper para um aluno cego de neurociência. E ele gerou não só uma explicação do paper, mas um tutorial em Python de como fazer as coisas que o paper explicava o que tinha que fazer. Então, assim, eu acho que o ponto que você tenta tirar de eu estou tentando entender a informação do paper e não necessariamente o paper em si, dita a tecnologia que você vai usar. Eu sou muito fã e um grande incentivador de Braille. Eu acho o Braille vital. Eu não faria 1% do que eu faço se não fosse Braille, principalmente para matemática. Então, linha Braille, para mim, é muito importante. Impressora Braille é muito importante, porque se eu estou lendo uma equação que tem 5 linhas, não adianta eu ter o leitor de tela lendo isso, porque quando chegar no final eu já esqueci completamente de começo. Mesma coisa com matriz. Se eu estou lendo uma tabela, eu quero essa tabela em Braille. Ler essa tabela no formato digital não vai ser tão acessível. Então, eu uso um pouco de tudo. De verdade, a gente vai... Agora saiu o MetaGlass, né? E o MetaGlass foi um boom na tecnologia assistiva também. Então, eu acho que a parte principal de estar nos Estados Unidos é ter acesso a tudo isso no dia que sai. Entendeu? Então, assim, saiu o MetaGlass, tá, deixa eu lá ver como é que funciona. E eu acho que entender como que isso tudo pode ser aplicado para pesquisa é muito importante. Por exemplo, o Michael tocou num ponto que eu acho crucial com relação aos implantes, que é o quão avançada a tecnologia assistiva está ficando hoje. Então, você começa a ter um questionamento interno do, mas para que eu quero o implante? O que esse implante vai me trazer que a tecnologia hoje não me traz? E a resposta, cada dia está ficando mais difícil. Porque quando você vê a vida de independência que o cego tem, quando você vê as coisas que a gente consegue fazer hoje, e você tem uma projeção do que a gente vai conseguir fazer em 5 anos, sabe, a gente começa a chegar num questionamento de functionability mais ou qualquer coisa. Então é o que o Michael falou, de como que a gente pode fazer isso ser útil. E então eu acho que isso amarra um pouco com a sua pergunta também.
Não, eu achei incrível o que você falou do Braille, porque a gente sempre surge a pergunta, não vai mais existir o Braille? E não é isso, né? As tecnologias, elas vêm para juntar, né? Para agregar, né? E o Braille sempre vai estar ali, né?
Existe há 250 anos, vai existir por mais 250. Porque eu acho que existe um termo em inglês que eu honestamente não sei como seria a tradução, que é o Braille Literacy, né? Que você realmente... que é o mesmo termo que se usa para ler e escrever. E eu acho isso... porque assim, você fala... não, mas o telefone, o iPhone consegue fazer tudo hoje. Perfeito. Você chega para ler os botões de um elevador para subir para um andar específico. Você vai usar Braille.
Alfabetizar, né?
Exato. Sabe? Você precisa saber que banheiro você está entrando. Sabe? Essas coisas pequenas do dia a dia. Porra, eu não quero ficar perguntando para o meu MetaGlass se o banheiro que eu tô na frente é masculino ou feminino. É muito mais fácil esticar a mão e ler o Braille. Entendeu? E eu acho que isso é uma coisa que, por exemplo, os implantes podem ajudar muito. Não é necessariamente fazer uma coisa que a tecnologia atual não consegue, mas como que nós conseguimos fazer com que as coisas que nós já conseguimos fazer hoje sejam menos difíceis cognitivamente falando, sejam menos cansativas, né? Então, claro que nós não vamos conseguir inventar a roda com um implante tão cedo, mas talvez a gente consiga fazer as coisas um pouco mais fáceis, né?
Sim. We have 2 more questions. Dr. Beyeler, are you with us?
Of course.
Okay, so I think this is for you and Lucas. The question is, what kind of volume would make it commercially viable for next generation implants make it to the market?
Yeah, that's a smart question, because this has really been a challenge. That even though retinitis pigmentosa is one of the most common causes of blindness, the market is much smaller than any person who would want to get the meta glasses, for example. So I think that's why Some of the companies have shifted their strategies. We heard about Second Sight is now working on a cortical implant. So it's not just going from retina to cortex, it's also expanding beyond vision and saying we're making a brain-computer interface that could be applied to vision, yes, but also to this, to this, to that. And so that's one way to expand the volume of and the market for next generation implants. So I don't have a number, but I can see this trend happening.
Okay.
And this is crucial in terms of, like, also in terms of cost. For example, you see one of the reasons that the Meta glass is so important is because for the first time we have this revolutionary assistive technology for $300, which is still a very high number, but considering how much OrCam or other devices charge, it's like 1/10 of OrCam. And so having enough volume and finding these other uses for the same technology, I think it's very important.
Okay. Thank you. And the last question, because we don't have more time. In the future, the association of various therapies for vision restoration could occur. For example, gene therapy for retinal dystrophies or retinal implants. Can you please make some comments about it?
In terms of whether we like it or which one will win, or any comments?
Any comments?
I hope they will all win. They'll all be viable. If you remember my earlier slide, one of the earliest slides is about the disease progression, right? And that some of these treatments are best suited for different stages of the disease. So we should ideally have a solution at every stage. So that includes gene therapy, that includes stem cell therapy, all these things, and then implants as well for the later stages. Lucas, do you want to add anything?
I think understanding that one fit all solution is not going to work. Like each type of disability, each type of blindness will require something different. Like I am blind because of retinoblastoma. So for me, like none of the retinal implants would work. But for someone with AMD, for example, the retinal implants are better than the cortical implants. So every technology will find a way to be useful for a different type of person.
Yeah, we need options.
So we're coming to an end. So I'd like to thank you again, Dr. Beyeler and Lucas, for being with us tonight. It was incredible to have your participation and insights. I'd like to thank the audience also and the questions, and please feel free to share it with anyone you'd like. I wish you all a very good evening, and we look forward to seeing you in our next section. Thank you.